The child who remembered heaven before being born. A shocking story. What if I told you there was a child who remembered heaven before being born? A child who spoke of things no one had ever told him. Secrets of the afterlife, descriptions of angels, and the presence of God. This is not just a story, it's a mystery that will shake your beliefs. Stay till the end, because what you are about to hear is something truly unbelievable. A mysterious beginning. It all started in a small town in the United States. A family, just like any other, lived a peaceful life. The parents, James and Rebecca, were Christians who strongly believed in God, but they never expected to witness something that would test their faith in a whole new way. Their son, Nathaniel, was just 3 years old when strange things began to happen. Unlike other kids his age, Nathaniel would say things that left his parents in shock. One evening, as Rebecca was tucking him into bed, he looked into her eyes and said something that made her heart stop. "Mommy, do you remember when I was in heaven before I came here?" Rebecca froze. She smiled nervously, thinking he was just making up a story. "What do you mean, sweetheart?" she asked, gently stroking his hair. Nathaniel sat up, his big, innocent eyes filled with certainty. "Before I was born, I was with God. I saw Jesus. He told me you would be my mommy." Her hands trembled as she listened. Her son was too young to even understand these concepts. Yet, he spoke with such confidence. Rebecca decided to test him. "What else do you remember about heaven?" Nathaniel thought for a moment before whispering, "The light. It was so bright, but it didn't hurt my eyes. And the angels, they sang to me before I came here. I remember their voices." Tears welled up in Rebecca's eyes. She was overwhelmed, but she didn't want to scare him. "Did Jesus say anything else to you?" she asked. Nathaniel nodded. His next words would send chills down her spine. "Yes, he said I had to come here to tell people something very important. But I forgot what it was." The days passed. Nathaniel continued to reveal more details. He described heaven in ways no 3-year-old could possibly know. He spoke about streets of gold, about a river of life, and about a throne where Jesus sat. One night, when James came home from work, Rebecca told him about their son's strange words. At first, James laughed. "He's just a kid," he said. "Maybe he heard something at church or saw a picture somewhere." But then Nathaniel did something that made James's face turn pale. "Papa," Nathaniel said, climbing onto his lap, "you were sad before I came, right?" James' heart skipped a beat. "You and Mommy prayed for a baby," Nathaniel continued. "God sent me to you because he knew you needed me." James was speechless. He and Rebecca had struggled to have a child for years. They had prayed every night, asking God for a baby. And now here was their son, saying he remembered being sent from heaven. Rebecca decided to dig deeper. She showed Nathaniel pictures of different places, asking him to point out anything that looked familiar. He shook his head at every image until she found a painting of heaven based on the Book of Revelation. Nathaniel's eyes lit up. "This," he exclaimed. "This looks like home." Rebecca gasped. "Home? You mean heaven?" Nathaniel nodded. "Yes, but it's even prettier than this." She flipped to another page, showing a painting of Jesus. "Do you know who this is?" Nathaniel giggled. "Yes, that's Jesus, but his eyes are brighter in heaven." By now, Rebecca and James were convinced that something supernatural was happening. Their son wasn't making this up. But then, things took an even stranger turn. One evening, while sitting on the porch, Nathaniel suddenly grabbed his mother's hand. His face turned serious. "Mommy, Jesus told me something is coming." Rebecca felt a chill run down her spine. "What do you mean?" Nathaniel looked up at the sky. "Something big. People need to listen to Jesus. Some have forgotten him, but he still loves them." His words were simple, yet they carried weight. James, who had been listening, leaned forward. "Nathaniel, did Jesus tell you what will happen?" The little boy lowered his voice. "He said to tell people to pray, to trust him, because soon he will do something wonderful." James and Rebecca exchanged nervous glances. Was their son given a message for the world? The investigation news of Nathaniel's memories spread through the town. Some people were amazed, believing he was a special child. Others thought it was just a child's imagination. A local pastor heard about Nathaniel and decided to visit the family. He sat down with the boy and asked, "Nathaniel, what does Jesus look like?" Nathaniel smiled. "He has a bright robe, and his face shines like the sun. And when he looks at you, You feel love inside your heart. The pastor wiped his tears. He had spent years studying scripture, and what this child described was exactly what was written in the Bible. But the real test came when the pastor showed Nathanael an old photograph of a man. "Do you know this person?" he asked. Nathanael's eyes widened. "Yes, he was in heaven too. He told me stories when I was there." Rebecca covered her mouth in shock. The photo was of the pastor's late father, a man who had died before Nathanael was even born. The message for the world. As Nathanael grew older, his memories of heaven began to fade, just as he had predicted. But he never forgot the message Jesus gave him. "Tell people to love one another," he would say. "Tell them Jesus is real." His words left a deep impact on everyone who heard them. James and Rebecca realized their son had been given a gift, a glimpse into the world beyond. And through him, they had been reminded of the most important truth. Heaven is real. Jesus is waiting. The reaction of the world. As Nathanael's story spread beyond their town, people from different places began reaching out. Some wanted to meet him, others wanted to test him. Pastors, skeptics, doctors, and even journalists. Everyone wanted to understand how a young child could recall details about heaven that matched the Bible so accurately. Rebecca and James were overwhelmed. They had never sought fame or attention, but now their son was at the center of a conversation that went beyond their small family. One evening, as Rebecca scrolled through her phone, she noticed an email from a famous Christian author who had written books about near-death experiences. He wanted to visit their home and personally meet Nathanael. Rebecca hesitated. She had seen how the world could twist stories, turning something beautiful into something controversial. But deep inside, she knew their son's story was not just for them. It was meant for the world. She turned to James. "Should we allow this?" she asked. James sighed. "I don't know. I just want to protect Nathanael. He's still a child." Before they could decide, Nathanael, who had been playing with his toy cars on the floor, looked up and said, "Jesus said people will listen. Some will believe, some won't. But I must still tell them." Rebecca and James stared at each other. How could a 4-year-old understand such things? It was settled. They would allow the author to visit. A week later, Dr. Mark Holloway, the Christian author, arrived at their home. He was in his 60s, with gray hair and kind eyes. As he stepped into their living room, he immediately noticed Nathanael sitting on the floor, flipping through a children's Bible. Dr. Holloway smiled. "Hello, young man." Nathanael looked up and grinned. "Hi." After chatting with Rebecca and James, Dr. Batem, Holloway gently asked, "Nathanael, can I ask you some questions?" Nathanael nodded. The author pulled out his notebook. "Do you remember what it felt like before you were born?" Nathanael tilted his head. "It felt peaceful, like I was floating, but I wasn't alone. Jesus was there, and angels." Dr. Holloway's hand shook slightly as he wrote, "What did Jesus say to you?" Nathanael thought for a moment. "He told me, you will go to earth, and you will love your family, and you will help people remember me." The room fell silent. Dr. Holloway glanced at James and Rebecca. Then he continued, "Nathanael, do you remember seeing anything special in heaven?" Nathanael's eyes brightened. "Yes. There was a big table with lots of food, and everyone was happy. They were waiting for a big party." Rebecca gasped. "That sounded exactly like the marriage supper of the Lamb from the book of Revelation." Dr. Holloway's voice shook with emotion. "Nathanael, did you see God?" The boy's face grew serious. "No one can see God's face, but I felt him. He is everywhere." Tears welled up in Dr. Holloway's eyes. A 4-year-old had just spoken deep biblical truth. As Nathanael's story gained attention, not everyone was convinced. A well-known atheist journalist wrote an article claiming Nathanael's parents had coached him. He accused them of exploiting their child for attention. Others argued that young children could create false memories. A few weeks later, a television network invited the family for an interview. James was hesitant. What if they twist his words? Rebecca held his hand. Nathanael isn't afraid. He knows the truth. Maybe we should trust God. When they arrived at the studio, the host wasted no time challenging them. Some people think Nathanael's story is just a child's imagination. What do you say to that? Nathanael, sitting between his parents, looked directly at the host. I didn't imagine Jesus. I know him. The host raised an eyebrow. But how do you know it was real? Nathanael smiled. Because he told me you would ask that. The audience gasped. The host stammered. He did? Nathaniel nodded. Yes, and he said to tell you he loves you. The room fell silent. The host's eyes filled with tears. She quickly moved on to another question, but something had changed in her expression. After the show, the host approached Rebecca. With tears in her eyes, she whispered, "My mother was a Christian. She always told me Jesus was real, but I walked away from faith. Your son just reminded me of something I tried to forget." Rebecca squeezed her hand. "Maybe Jesus is calling you back." That night, that same television host gave her life to Christ. One night, Nathaniel woke up crying. Rebecca rushed to his room. "What happened?" Nathaniel sobbed. "I had a dream, a very, very sad dream." Rebecca hugged him. "Tell me, sweetheart." Nathaniel wiped his tears. "I saw a big, dark place. People were crying. They were calling out for Jesus, but they couldn't reach him." Rebecca's heart pounded. "What else did you see?" Nathaniel looked down. "Jesus was sad. He said, 'I don't want them to be here, but they didn't choose me.'" Rebecca's throat tightened. She knew exactly what her son had seen. It was hell. Nathaniel grabbed her hand. "Mommy, we have to tell people. Jesus doesn't want anyone to go there. He loves them, but they have to choose him." As Nathaniel grew older, his memories of heaven faded, just as he had predicted. But his faith remained unshaken. At the age of 10, he stood before a church congregation and spoke, "Jesus is real, heaven is real, and he loves you. But don't wait until it's too late to know him. Choose him now." People wept. Some gave their lives to Christ that very day. Nathaniel's story was no longer just a personal experience. It had become a testimony that changed lives. Nathaniel's life became a living testament of God's love. Even as he grew up, he never forgot the message he was sent to share. Heaven is real, Jesus is calling, and faith is the key. Some may believe, some may not,